if you just start creating like a single thread in chat GPT and talking to it every day, planning your morning, talking about what you want to achieve, it will learn how you think. It will help you become your second brain where you can just dump stuff and then recall it later. Hey, what did I talk about that other day that kind of sounded like this or whatever?
Now, our guest today, at just 32 years old, a doctor warned him that his intense work habits were life-threatening, telling him, look, man, you need to stop or you're going to die. For nearly 9 years, Dylan worked relentlessly, eventually reaching a point of severe burnout in 2019, which led to the closure of one of his businesses. As the founder of Profit Launchpad, he is laser focused on helping service businesses scale past their first $1 million in revenue and get out of the overworking mindset. Welcome to the show, Dylan Jones.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
I'm excited about this conversation today for a number of reasons. I mean, we're at the time of our recording, I mean, this will air into 2025, but you and I are hanging out right around the Christmas break and, thinking about the end of a year. A lot of people are pushing hard to close the end of the year, whether it's a revenue target, some goals that they set at the beginning of the year. And even if they're just working for someone else, they're often put under these pressure cookers because we have all the family events, we have travel plans. There's 1,000 things happening in the last month of the year. And what I've found is it really puts people under that pressure scenario. Now, having, been forged into a diamond through pressure yourself, what are some of the things that you would suggest people need to be aware of? If we take us back to your story and what was happening for you over these 9 years that kept you hustling so hard?
I mean, beyond just trying to make a living and trying to make a splash in my own career, I think it's just that I have a natural, like a lot of entrepreneurs have a natural and born tendency to just work, and especially when it's earlier in your career. Or this was my second business that we had closed, but the first one was really successful because I worked worked really hard for all the time that was available. And then the second one, I thought the same. I could apply the same thing, and that turned out not to be true. And so I look back at that not super fondly, but at least I learned a really strong lesson of it doesn't, you can't outwork a bad idea. You can't outwork poor product market fit. So, make sure especially this time of year, you're working for the right things. Like for me on Friday, I'm logged off until the 3rd. And I think a lot of people should do that. So when you first asked like how to mitigate, like if you have to burn the candle on both ends for the rest of this week, do so, but only if you're taking a break. And I think a lot of people, for some reason, work through this time of year thinking they're going to get ahead of next year. It's like nobody of any consequence, decision makers, anything is working during that time. It's like trying to raise money in August. It's like, no, all the rich people, all the investors, they're on break. You're only talking to junior analysts. Like just wait until September. And I think it's the same lesson this time of year is it's a great time of year to slow down, to focus on the big things in your life and business. Focus on one big problem, what you want to change. But like it's not the time to be grinding away, especially over the break. And I just don't see the success in it. I've seen many people try and never really make that splash. It seems like wasted effort.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you identified that. Now, thinking back to going through this experience, I can only imagine being, in the doctor's office when you're being told, like, basically having we'll call it the coming to Jesus conversation that you need to start making some changes in your life. And what was the first kind of reaction that you had when you kind of had that sit down conversation and you felt that, like, were you upset? Were you offended? Were you like, well, how am I going to keep going on? What were some of the thoughts that came up for you when you were told that you really needed to take a step back and start slowing down?
Honestly, at that point, it was like, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. So I was told had there's a slew of things, but one of the big ones was the minerals and my micronutrients in my body were so low that like my like magnesium and calcium in my bones was a bit depleted.
Mm.
Which was like I didn't know that could happen. But it was just because I've been not taking care of myself for so long. Like, it was weird. I was still very fit and very active. I was skiing and CrossFit and hiking and stuff. But I just was never allowing myself to rest and have have that time to recover. So I was pretty much perpetually exhausted and very irritable. I remember that specifically being very like struggling articulating myself, struggling to find patience. I was just always really irritable and I was just because I was exhausted, right? And I think a lot of people that's that last emotion we have when you're too tired to be happy, joyous, when you're too tired to be disappointed, just the only thing you have left is anger. And like so you find a lot of entrepreneurs. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. They're just kind of angry. And it's because they're white.
Wow. And you must have seen that starting to show up, I would imagine, in your relationships and the people that probably working with you, working for you, and even just like your personal relationships, family members and people surrounding you. Was that part of the reason? I'm kind of curious. Obviously, the fatigue that there's a natural feeling that knows maybe I should go get myself looked at or checked out. Was this kind of an annual, regular checkup, or did you go in proactively say, you know what, I need to try and figure out and resolve what's going on, and how I'm feeling? And is that sort of how this all came about for you?
Honestly, it's because I could have sold that business. Now I would have been selling it for basically pennies on the dollar, but it would have been enough to cover like the initial investment type of deal. I was so uninterested in even going through the process of the due diligence and working with the buyers. And they were, I'm from Vancouver, Canada. They were in Cleveland, so I would have to fly back and forth from. I was so uninterested in it. I just just closed, literally just closed the doors. Just emailed everyone, said we're done. Thanks, all the best. Um, and after that period, after legally we signed the closing documents, and I was just kind of reflecting. So man, why didn't I like? I was so uninterested, and like at that point, I was like sleeping a ton. I've never really been a big sleeper. I'm like a 7 hours a night kind of guy at the most, and I was like 10, 11 hours. So I was just white and uninterested in a lot, and that was like
Mm.
a real like I didn't want to do my hobbies. I didn't want to go see friends. I didn't want to be social. Even now, even though at that point I had a lot of time, right? And so I went to the my family doctor, and talked to him and just said like, "I just white man." He said, "Oh, let's go talk to can't remember who the specialist was, but anyways, I did like a blood panel and they're like, you are your cortisol is about as high as it can get, and your micronutrients are very low." And I had things like you can still see here a little bit on like my beard hair was falling out, and I had lost a ton of weight, and it was like pretty obvious. There's obvious external signs, but the like the real catalyst was just that like uninterested,
Mm.
um, which is super common in people with like depression and things like that. And what I found out is I had like no, see, I can't remember the name, but it was like depression for a reason. It wasn't like a long term chemical depression that some people really suffer with. It was more like just this like acute anxiety and depression from that particular instance. And once I was able to re-energize, rest, um, find a new purpose, or just honestly just walk my dog a bunch. I started coming up on the other side.
Wow, very interesting. And so, as you started to come back around, again, getting rid of the business at that time, what was the thing that you felt finally created some spark for you? Where did you start to get? Do you recall what was the first kind of fire that began to reignite for you as you started to work your way through that?
Yeah, yeah, for me, it was definitely recognizing I pursued business in the way that I had because that was what was popular in terms of like business marketing, what you'd read in, Forbes and Inc. and what I don't know where else, maybe Business Week or something like that. And you see these guys, and like it's always been popular. It's popular again right now. Like Alex Hormozzi's like perpetuating it in a terrible way. And I like a lot what he says about sales and marketing, but around what he says lifestyle, to me, he's crazy. And it really showed we are marketed to as entrepreneurs to do things a certain way. And the result is like most businesses fail. And I don't think most businesses fail um, because people don't work hard enough. I think they work too hard in the wrong directions,
Mm.
and they don't take the time to learn about how their business works. They don't take time to learn about the market and like really work into a sustainable business process. Really, most people want to blitz scale because we're all marketed that SaaS is the greatest thing in the world, or tech, and that we should all be tech companies. But I was a manufacturing company. Now, like my company works with local services, local trades. They're not, you're not supposed to blitz scale in 2.5 years and raise a bunch of capital to have a $2-3 million plumbing company, right? You're supposed to grow sustainably, build relationships with your vendor partners, and anyone who's been in business for a long time like really knows that is like where do you make the most money? Where do you make or not even the most money, but like the most profit, the most value? Where do you build the business? Where do you build your long term like accessibility to capital? It's like relationships. And when you're in that mindset of I have to burn it, I have to do this, I have to do that, and you're outside of like Silicon Valley, it's like you don't need to do it. If you want to go build a tech company in 2 years and make hundreds of millions of dollars, um, in Silicon Valley, like by all means do that. But look at the failure rates as well. Before, like, we only hear about the winners, and to come full circles, I'm like, we only hear about the winners, but there's way more losers than there has to be, especially in local businesses. Like there's so much room in the ecosystem for really well operated businesses. But so anyways, to answer your question, that spark for me was really like, how can I help people? How can I build companies of my own based on those principles, which I've been doing? But then as I build those principles into my own businesses, how can I help other people? And that's where Profit Launchpad came from.
Wow, incredible. Well, we're going to hear more about Profit Launchpad when we come back after these important messages.